There's a silence inside you that isn't peace. It's pressure. You try to stay calm, to breathe, to focus. But something inside tightens like a storm behind your ribs. You call it anxiety. You've tried to fix it with routines, habits, pills, distractions. But what if that pressure isn't a problem? What if it's power-trapped, suffocated, and unclaimed? What if anxiety isn't something broken in you, but something buried? Carl Jung once said, "What you resist not only persists, but will grow in size." What we call anxiety may not be weakness. It may be the revolt of your unlived life. The energy of everything you suppressed, every truth you swallowed, every no you silenced, every part of you that once wanted to roar, but was taught to whisper. Most people think of anxiety as fear, but beneath fear there is often rage. Not violent rage, but soul rage. The anger of your deeper self denied for so long that it became internalized. You weren't allowed to want too much, to feel too deeply, to speak too loudly. So the life force that was meant to become your creative fire, your boundaries, your courage, was redirected. It turned inward. It became friction. It became pressure. It became you. We call it anxiety. But Jung had another word for it: psychic energy. He believed emotion wasn't just a feeling, it was a form of energy. And all energy, if blocked, becomes distorted. When you block anger, it becomes depression. When you suppress desire, it becomes restlessness. When you deny grief, it becomes numbness. And when you bury the truth of who you are, it becomes anxiety. Because you're not just scared, you're split between the person you think you should be and the person you secretly are. And every time you betray that deeper self to stay safe or likable or fine, something inside coils tighter. That coiling is energy with nowhere to go. You feel it in your stomach, your chest, your breath. And you think something's wrong with you. But what if the problem is not that you feel too much, but that you don't know what it's really saying? Because anxiety is not always a cry for help. Sometimes it's a battle cry, a revolt of your deeper nature against a life that doesn't fit it. And the more you try to fix yourself without listening, the louder the revolt becomes. Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." But anxiety is often the unconscious trying to break through. Your unlived self, the warrior, the artist, the wild one, the truth teller, all knocking from beneath the surface, asking to be felt, to be known, to be expressed. But instead of hearing it, you pathologize it, you label it, you sedate it. And in doing so, you prolong the suffering. Because anxiety isn't always a malfunction, sometimes it's a message. The body's way of telling you you are not living in alignment. You are adapting to survive, but not becoming to thrive. Ask yourself, when did I learn to shrink? When did I start hiding my intensity? Who taught me that it was safer to be small, agreeable, invisible? At what moment did my power begin to feel like a threat, even to me? There is a profound psychological truth that few dare to face. We are not afraid of our weakness. We are afraid of our strength, our instincts, our authenticity. Because power, real power, means responsibility. It means change. It means loss. If you embraced who you truly are, you might have to leave that relationship. Speak that truth. End that pattern. You might have to let part of your old self die. And that's terrifying. So instead, you keep it buried. You smile when you want to scream. You agree when you want to object. You perform peace when your soul is at war. And the body remembers. It always remembers. That trembling you feel, it's not fear of the world. It's fear of your own potential. the fear of what you might become if you stopped holding back. And every time you suppress that power, the psyche turns on itself. You live with an inner civil war between the mask you wear and the truth underneath it. But no mask is weightless. And the longer you wear it, the more your soul aches for oxygen. This is where the anxiety comes from the disowned parts of you trying to return, from the unlived life pressing at the seams, from the pressure of becoming what you were meant to be in a world that trained you to forget. You think your anxiety means you're broken, but what if it means you're breaking free? There's a voice inside you that never stopped speaking. You just learned to stop listening. It speaks in feelings, in symbols, in dreams. And when you ignore it long enough, it screams through the body. That scream is what we call anxiety, but it's not just emotional noise. It's encoded intelligence, a forgotten language of your psyche, a cry from the self to return to what is real. Jung believed that symptoms are not enemies to fight, but messengers to understand. And the message of anxiety, if we are quiet enough to hear it, is almost always this: you have more life in you than you are currently living. You were taught to be normal, to behave, to be manageable. So you adjusted. You shaped yourself into someone acceptable. You repressed what was inconvenient. You disowned what was wild. But the psyche does not forget what the ego disowns. It buries it. And anything buried alive becomes dangerous. Not because it's evil, but because it's powerful and unrecognized. This is what Jung called the shadow, the parts of yourself you've pushed out of awareness, not just the shame or the fear, but also the joy you were never allowed to feel, the assertiveness you were punished for showing, the sexuality you were shamed for having, the intuition you were taught to distrust. When that much energy is locked out of consciousness, the nervous system becomes overloaded. It has to carry the weight of what your mind refuses to face. That's why anxiety often feels like too much emotion, too much tension, too much thought. Because you are not just feeling the present. You're carrying the suppressed past, and all of it is trying to be seen. In Jungian psychology, energy wants one thing: expression, integration, wholeness. The psyche longs for totality, not perfection. But most people don't know this. They try to escape anxiety rather than dialogue with it. They numb it, deny it, or distract themselves from it. But what you repress doesn't die. It waits. It waits in your body. It waits in your triggers. It waits in your dreams. And it keeps resurfacing, not to torment you, but to remind you that the self cannot be silenced forever. We often confuse anxiety with fragility. But what if it's a sign of untapped power, blocked by fear, shame, or a lifetime of self-abandonment? What if your trembling isn't weakness, but a vibration of energy preparing to be released? Because here's the paradox. Most anxiety comes from the parts of you that want to live more fully, not less. Think about it. When you suppress anger, you lose your fire. When you suppress desire, you lose your passion. When you suppress grief, you lose your depth. And what is left? A hollow self, anxious, confused, disembodied. Not because you're broken, but because you've been exiled from your own soul. Anxiety is often the doorway back. It's your body saying, there is more life here. Let me move. Let me breathe. Let me become. But instead of opening that door, we fortify it. We try to manage the symptoms without asking where they come from. We look for quick relief instead of slow truth. But there is no shortcut through the soul. You have to walk through the terrain of your own fear, your own rage, your own heartbreak. Not to drown in it, but to retrieve the pieces of yourself scattered there. Jung believed that neurosis, including anxiety, was often the result of a refusal of the legitimate suffering of life. In other words, we avoid the pain of being fully alive, and that avoidance creates deeper pain. We don't want to grieve, so we stay numb. We don't want to confront, so we stay passive. We don't want to awaken, so we stay anxious because staying stuck feels safer than facing what might change us. But the longer you avoid the truth, the heavier the anxiety becomes. Because your psyche knows, your body knows, your soul knows, and they will not rest until you reclaim what was lost. Ask yourself this: what would happen if you let yourself feel the full force of your own energy? If you stopped trying to be small, to be good, to be safe, and instead let yourself be real, not reckless but real? What if your anxiety is not a call to retreat, but a call to rise, because beneath the trembling is a will to power? Not power over others, but power over your own life. The power to say no, to say yes, to change, to feel, to create, to speak, to move. That is the power that's been repressed. And every anxious moment is a signal that it's still alive in you. But it's locked behind years of fear, years of conditioning, years of internalized shame. That's why healing isn't just about calming down, it's about waking up. It's not about erasing the symptom, it's about translating it, listening to it, letting it guide you back to the parts of yourself you had to abandon just to survive. You were not meant to live as half a person. Your emotions are not random. They are signals. Your anxiety is not senseless. It is the cry of a deeper self buried beneath roles, rules, and repression begging to come back to life. Not to ruin you, but to restore you. Imagine a dam holding back a vast body of water. On the surface, everything looks still controlled, manageable. But behind the dam, there is pressure. Constant, silent pressure. The more water that builds, the more the dam must resist. Now imagine your psyche as that dam and the water as everything you've repressed. Your instincts, your anger, your unspoken needs, your unlived dreams, your inner truths, your creative impulses, your primal fears. All the energy you decided was too much. Too loud, too dangerous. You didn't destroy it, you just buried it. But just like that water, it never stopped pressing forward. And the tension you feel, that trembling in your chest, the tightness in your throat, the dread in your stomach, it's the dam beginning to crack. Anxiety is not random. It is a symptom of inner conflict, a war between your need for safety and your need for truth, between the life you live and the life that wants to be lived through you. This is why it feels like something is always about to happen, because it is. Something is trying to emerge, not outside you, but from within, and you're resisting it. Out of fear, out of habit, out of survival. But the psyche doesn't want you to survive. It wants you to become. Jung taught that every symptom is symbolic, that psychological suffering is the language of the soul, and that repression is not just forgetting, it's fragmentation. It splits the psyche into parts, the part that adapts, and the part that remembers, the part that conforms, and the part that revolts. And if these parts remain unconscious, they grow in power. They appear in your life as anxiety, depression, addiction, panic. They appear in relationships, in patterns, in dreams. Not as enemies, but as invitations, as signs that the path forward is not in further suppression, but in radical integration. This is not about fixing yourself. It's about reclaiming yourself. because power that is repressed becomes poison. But power that is integrated becomes transformation. Jung believed that when a person reconnects with the parts of themselves they had abandoned when they reintegrate the shadow, they don't just become calmer. They become whole. And wholeness does not mean perfection. It means honesty, realness, depth. It means facing the truths you've spent years avoiding and discovering that they are not monsters, but allies in disguise. So how do you begin? You stop running from the feeling. You sit with it. Not to analyze it, but to listen to it, to witness it, to feel the pulse of what's been buried. You ask it, not how do I make you go away, but what have I not yet understood? You treat your anxiety not as a disorder, but as a guide, a messenger, a symbol. What if every time your chest tightened, it wasn't a threat, but a threshold? What if the pressure was not a sign of weakness, but an invitation to break open, not apart? What if the fear is simply the body's way of saying we are approaching something real? Because realness is terrifying when you've spent your whole life adapting. When your nervous system has been trained to brace against truth. When your body learned that being authentic was dangerous. When your heart learned that wanting was shameful. When your voice learned to be quiet, even when it wanted to scream. This is not your fault, but it is your responsibility now. Responsibility doesn't mean blame. It means power, the ability to respond, to choose, to shift, to reconnect. And the truth is, the power you've been repressing is still here, still waiting, still yours. It never left, it only changed form. It became anxiety. And now it's calling you back. You were never meant to live in survival mode. You were never meant to be a shell of yourself. You were never meant to walk around pretending everything is okay when your soul is starving. You were built to feel deeply, to express, to create, to speak, to move, to become. And that becoming can be painful, but it's not dangerous. It's sacred. It's the process of returning to your essence. Jung called this individuation the lifelong process of becoming who you truly are, not who the world told you to be. It's not easy. It often begins in crisis, in anxiety, in inner collapse. Because when the false self begins to crack, the true self starts to emerge. Not as a fantasy, but as a force, a presence, a knowing. The reason most people stay anxious is not because they're broken, it's because they're resisting this emergence. They're clinging to old identities, outdated roles, inherited beliefs. They're living someone else's life. And the soul cannot breathe in a costume. The mask will suffocate you. The performance will kill you. Not literally, but spiritually. And your anxiety knows that. That's why it won't let you rest. Because you are meant for more than compliance. You are meant for communion with yourself, with your soul, with the power that lives beneath the fear. So next time you feel it, that surge of dread, that spike of panic, stop and listen. Not to the surface thoughts, but to the deeper truth. Ask yourself, what part of me is trying to return right now? What instinct, what memory, what voice? And then breathe into it. Give it space, let it speak, let it move, because that is how power returns. Not all at once, but breath by breath, truth by truth, moment by moment, until one day your anxiety is no longer a war zone, but a doorway. There's something tragic about a person who never lives as themselves, who walks through life as a version, a role, a shadow of who they could have been. Not because they lacked potential, but because they feared their own depth, because they were taught that truth was dangerous. That emotion was weakness. That power meant harm. And so they traded their fire for safety, their intuition for approval, their soul for silence. This trade is what Jung called soul loss. And anxiety is often its echo, the lingering cry of everything that was abandoned for the sake of fitting in. But the soul cannot be buried forever. Even in the most exhausted, fragmented person, the self waits. It waits beneath the masks, the roles, the defenses. It waits in the trembling, in the restlessness, in the moments you feel like you're losing control. Not because you're falling apart, but because your deeper self is breaking through. Jung said there is no coming to consciousness without pain. And this is why anxiety often increases just before a breakthrough. Because the psyche knows when a mask is no longer sustainable. It tightens, it resists, it panics not to punish you, but to prepare you. That's what you need to understand. Anxiety is not just a disorder. It's a threshold. The body's way of saying, we can't live like this anymore. We can't keep pretending. We can't keep holding it in. We can't keep living a life that betrays the soul. And so the system shakes. It trembles. It flares. And you interpret it as weakness, but it's a sign of awakening. The breakdown is not the end. It's the beginning. The mask is cracking. And beneath it is you. You as you were before the world told you who to be. You with your wild heart and your untamed truths. You with your instincts and your inner knowing. You with your sacred rage, your ancient grief, your unspoken joy. You who still remembers what it means to feel, to want, to burn, to become. This emergence is not clean. It's not comfortable. It's not easy. But it's real. And that's what matters. Because your wholeness does not come through avoidance. It comes through courage. The courage to feel what you were taught to fear. The courage to face what you once had to hide. The courage to reclaim the parts of you that were exiled in order to survive. This is the true nature of healing. Not erasing symptoms, but understanding what they are pointing to. Not numbing the pain, but honoring its message. Not returning to who you were, but becoming who you were always meant to be. Whole, awake, alive. If you're still listening, then a part of you already knows. You're not here for shallow fixes. You're here for truth. You're tired of pretending. You're exhausted from the performance. And there's something inside you, something ancient, something wild that refuses to stay silent any longer. It is not your anxiety that needs healing. It is your separation from your own soul. And the only way to return is to listen, to feel, to stop running, and to begin walking back slowly, bravely toward yourself. Because in the end, anxiety is not the enemy. It is the fire alarm of the soul. And you must ask yourself, what have I ignored for so long that my body had to scream, you are not broken. You are not too sensitive. You are not too much. You are not defective. You are dismembered, separated from the power that once made you whole. The anxiety is not your flaw. It is your invitation. To return, to integrate, to rise. You were not born to be manageable. You were born to be real. And the moment you stop trying to control it is the moment it begins to transform. Because what you call anxiety is just repressed power waiting to be remembered. And now it's time. Why some people will always affect you until you do this. Shadow work, psychological projection, and emotional responsibility. There are people you haven't seen in years who still live inside your body. Their voice echoes in your choices. Their absence burns behind your silence. Their judgment slips into your posture. And it's not because they were powerful, it's because they touched a part of you you haven't met yet. The people who affect us the most are rarely the ones we love. They're the ones who reflect, who awaken a hidden part of our inner world, not by intention, but by resonance. And until you face that part, you will keep thinking it's them. But it's not. The reason they affect you is because they've activated something in you that you haven't yet claimed as yours. What we call emotional triggers are often the unconscious screaming to be seen. A reaction, an irritation, a sudden collapse of our sense of self. These are not accidents. They are patterns, familiar loops of unresolved emotion tied to hidden beliefs about who we are, what we deserve, and what we're still trying to avoid. Carl Jung called this the shadow, the unseen parts of the psyche that carry our rejected instincts, our repressed desires, our wounded memories. Not because they're evil, but because we were told they weren't acceptable. And so they were buried, not deleted, just displaced, waiting to be mirrored by another, waiting to be projected. You think you're reacting to them, but you're reacting to yourself, to the unmet child in you who learned to stay silent, to the abandoned part of you that still doesn't trust love, to the fire you swallowed years ago because no one could hold its heat. So when someone ignores you, dismisses you, betrays you, you feel it deeper than the moment. It's not just the present they've touched. It's the past. The body keeps a kind of emotional score, a memory beneath memory, where the psyche maps old wounds onto new people. This is projection, when the unconscious casts an internal story onto the face of someone else. You don't see them. You see your unresolved pain wearing their face. The irony is this: until you recognize what's yours, you will always think it's theirs. You'll keep assigning blame, replaying scenes in your head, trying to rewrite what already happened. But healing doesn't come from rearranging the past. It comes from finally confronting your relationship to it. And that means owning what lives inside you. It means asking, not why did they do this to me, but why did I need it to mean what it meant? Why did it hurt where it hurt? What part of me did it awaken that I've never dared to speak of? Jung once wrote, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves, but most people don't want to understand. They want to escape. They want closure, not consciousness. Peace without process. They want to be free, but only from pain, not from the identity that pain created. And so they carry the same emotional blueprint into every relationship, every argument, every withdrawal, thinking it's about the other person. But it never was. The person is only the trigger. You are the one still loaded. There's a hidden cost to avoiding shadow work. And it's not just internal suffering, it's emotional dependency. When you don't own your projections, you start needing others to behave a certain way, just so you can feel okay. You become reactive, fragile, easily manipulated. You call it love, but it's really control. You call it compatibility, but it's actually co-regulation of unhealed trauma. And every time someone steps outside your expectations, it feels like abandonment, not because they did something wrong, but because they stopped playing the role your shadow had cast them in. And here is where most people stop, right at the edge of discomfort, right before the mirror cracks. But if you dare to go further, if you let yourself feel the rawness beneath the reaction, you will begin to see what's really yours. You will begin to understand why this person had such power over you. And it's not because they gave you something. It's because they exposed something. A fragment, a fire, a forgotten feeling that needed their presence to be remembered. They are not your enemy. They are your symbol. You don't need to get over them. You need to go through what they represent. Because until you do, the same pattern will reappear in different faces with different names, but always with the same wound underneath. This is not punishment. This is initiation, a call to meet the part of you you've been running from in the mirror of another. And when you finally do, they lose their power. Not because they've changed, but because you have. There's a quiet violence in avoidance. Not the kind that screams, but the kind that keeps you small. It's in the way you shift your tone to not upset them. It's in the way your body tenses before you even know why. It's in the half smile you wear when you want to scream, and the stories you repeat just to feel in control. You think you've moved on, but your nervous system remembers everything. Every time you swallowed the truth to be loved. Every time you gave more just to be safe. Every time your needs were too much, so you made yourself less. This is not just memory, this is identity. Shaped not by who you are, but by who you had to become to survive. And that's why some people still affect you, because they carry the same emotional frequency as someone you once depended on, someone you couldn't afford to lose. Maybe it was a parent, a sibling, a lover, someone whose love you needed more than your truth. And now as an adult, you meet them again, not literally, symbolically. In the partner who withholds affection, in the friend who disappears when you're vulnerable, in the colleague who makes you feel invisible. And just like before, you don't react to the person in front of you, you react to the emotional memory they awaken. This is the loop. This is the repetition compulsion Jung and Freud both warned about. It's the psyche's attempt to recreate the unresolved in the hope that this time it might go differently. But it doesn't go differently. Because you're still looking outward. Still trying to fix them, understand them, decode them. Still hoping that if they finally see you, finally apologize, finally love you, right, that you'll feel whole. But that hope is a trap. Because what you actually crave is not their love. It's your own emotional liberation. Their validation can't give that to you. Even if they changed, even if they did everything right, it wouldn't free you. Because the prison was never their behavior. It was your interpretation of it. It was the story your unconscious wrote without your consent. A story that says, if they don't choose me, I'm not worthy. If they abandon me, I must be unlovable. If they hurt me, it's because I deserve pain. These are not truths. These are shadows. And until you rewrite them, they will keep writing you. Taking emotional responsibility does not mean blaming yourself. It means becoming conscious of what lives inside you. It means recognizing that your reactions are clues, not curses. Every time someone triggers you, the psyche is pointing toward a buried wound, a place where the self split from itself in order to survive. Maybe you had to be the caretaker. Maybe you had to be the pleaser. Maybe you had to be the rebel or the ghost. But whatever mask you wore, it was never who you really were. And now when someone touches that mask, the wound underneath screams. That scream is not weakness. It's awakening. It's the soul saying, there is something here that you haven't made peace with. Most people numb it, distract from it, blame it, or worse, spiritualize it. They talk about forgiveness before they've felt the rage. They chase peace before they've honored the pain. They call it healing, but it's just avoidance in prettier words. Real healing is not graceful. It's brutal. It's the moment you realize that everything you blamed others for was a map back to yourself. And that map doesn't care about who was right. It cares about what's unconscious, what's unintegrated, What's still dictating your life from the shadows? So here is the choice. And it will come again and again when someone affects you deeply. Will you chase them, or will you face yourself? Will you look into the mirror they've unknowingly held up and ask, what does this awaken in me? What is being revealed not about them, but about my inner architecture? Because when you do this, when you choose inner inquiry over external blame, you reclaim the only real power. There is the power to no longer be manipulated by your own unconscious. This is how you take your energy back, not by becoming detached or indifferent, but by becoming deeply responsible. Not for others, but for the emotional world within you. Every trigger becomes a teacher. Every reaction becomes a portal. Every person who once held power over you becomes a mirror of where you have yet to step into your own wholeness. And this is the essence of shadow work. Not to become better, but to become more whole. To stop being ruled by fragments of yourself you never got to fully own. It's a strange truth: the more you understand yourself, the less others control you. Not because they change, but because your inner landscape no longer mirrors theirs. The emotional hooks that used to snag you fall away when you integrate the parts of yourself that once reached out blindly for validation. This is not indifference. This is clarity. A clarity that comes from no longer needing someone else to complete a story you didn't write. You stop chasing apologies. You stop rehearsing confrontations in your head. You stop needing the world to make your pain meaningful. Because now you do that yourself. You give the pain meaning not by rationalizing it, but by feeling it all the way through and seeing what it reveals. There are no shortcuts to this. No affirmation, no technique, no mantra will replace the hard work of radical self-honesty. You have to be willing to descend into the psyche, into the anger that once protected you, into the sadness you buried beneath busyness, into the shame that grew around a need that was never met. This descent is sacred. Jung called it the night sea journey, the symbolic passage into the unconscious, where we confront the monsters we once ran from. And the monsters are not evil. They are exiled parts of you. Forgotten truths, raw instincts, unlived potentials. They haunt you not to destroy you, but to be reintegrated. To remind you, you are not one thing. You are a constellation of selves, and all of them want to come home. But home is not built through comfort. It's built through confrontation. Through looking at the people who trigger you and asking, why does this person's voice live in my head? Why does their opinion matter more than my own? Why do I still twist myself into shapes just to be acceptable in their eyes? These are not rhetorical questions. These are doors. Behind them are the fragments of your psyche still waiting to be seen. And once you see them truly without judgment, you begin to reclaim something extraordinary. Your emotional sovereignty, the capacity to be with your feelings without outsourcing them to others. The ability to hold your pain without making someone else responsible for fixing it. This is emotional maturity. And it doesn't come from age, it comes from awareness. But the truth is, not everyone wants this. Some people would rather keep bleeding in familiar ways than face the terror of true self-responsibility. Because to admit that you're reacting to your own projections is to also admit that you've been asleep. That much of your suffering was not caused, but allowed. And that's a hard pill to swallow. But it's also the first taste of real freedom. Because what was allowed can now be stopped. What was unconscious can now be known. And what was once projected can now be owned. You will still feel things. You will still be hurt, challenged, disappointed. But those experiences won't break you because they won't be confused with who you are. You'll begin to see other people's behavior not as commentary on your worth, but as reflections of their own unconscious, their own wounds, their own battles. And in that clarity, you'll feel something unexpected peace. Not the shallow kind that depends on everyone being nice, but the deep kind that comes from no longer betraying yourself just to be loved. This doesn't mean you tolerate everything. It means you discern without drama. You set boundaries without needing someone to be the villain. You walk away not to punish, but to protect the wholeness you've worked so hard to rebuild. This is the gift of shadow work. It doesn't make life painless. It makes pain purposeful. It doesn't erase the people who affected you. It rewrites their meaning. They're no longer threats. They're no longer gods. They're mirrors. And once you've seen what they reflect, you no longer need to stare. There will always be people who awaken something in you. A deep ache, a memory, a need you didn't know was still alive. Some will stay. Most won't. But all of them arrive for a reason. Not to complete you, but to reveal what was always incomplete. And if you pay attention, if you stop trying to change them and start listening to what their presence exposes in you, they become teachers. Not because they're wise, but because your soul used them as a key to the locked places, the forgotten rooms, the exiled emotions. They bring you back to yourself, not through comfort, but through friction. This is the paradox of healing. You cannot do it alone, but no one else can do it for you. Other people activate the wounds, but only you can choose to feel them, to witness them, to unbind them from your identity. And when you do, when you feel what was once unfelt, when you meet the part of you that never got to speak, something ancient begins to shift. The loops begin to dissolve. The triggers lose their grip. The people who once held power over your nervous system begin to fade, not because they disappear, but because your projection no longer needs them. In truth, the people who affect us the most are not gods or devils. They are symbols, archetypes, mirrors of unmet needs, suppressed feelings, unresolved dynamics. And until we meet those dynamics inside ourselves, we remain trapped in a kind of emotional possession, projecting onto lovers the absence of a parent, projecting onto enemies the rage we never got to express, projecting onto friends the responsibility to make us feel whole. But projection is not love. It is longing dressed in illusion. And once that illusion breaks, love can finally begin. Not the kind that demands, but the kind that sees, clearly, holds responsibly, and releases with reverence when it must. You may still feel haunted sometimes. You may still hear their voice in your head. That's okay. That's residue, not failure. The psyche takes time to rewire. But now you know what to do with the echo. You don't run from it. You listen, you trace it back. You ask what part of me is still speaking through their voice, and you sit with that part. You make room for it. You offer it what no one else ever did, understanding. Patience, permission to exist. And slowly, what once felt like a trigger becomes a truth, a quiet knowing, a signal of where more love is needed, not from them, but from you. Because here's what they don't tell you. No one truly heals by changing others. We heal when we finally become the person we were waiting for, when we stop outsourcing our emotional weather to the moods and opinions of others, when we stop confusing reaction with truth and projection with reality, when we stop needing someone to fix us and finally begin to feel what's been driving the need all along. In the end, it's not about the people who affected you. It's about who you become once you stop giving them that power. Once you stop building your identity around how they treated you. Once you stop shrinking or swelling just to match their reflection. Who are you when no one else is shaping your mirror? Who are you when the only voice you listen to is your own? Not the anxious voice of your wounds, but the steady voice of your inner truth. That is the question. That is the return. That is the quiet reckoning at the heart of every trigger, every heartbreak, every projection that ever disguised itself as fate. Will you meet yourself now, not as the wounded one, but as the one who is finally ready to see? Because the people who affect you are not here to break you. They are here to show you where you were already broken and where you're finally ready to be whole. And the moment you see this not just as a concept, but as a felt truth, you are no longer trapped. You are no longer chasing closure. You are no longer rearranging shadows. You are simply awake. And no one can affect you more than that. The mask you wear is why you're not free. How the persona sabotages your soul's wholeness. There is a moment quiet and cruel when you look in the mirror and realize that the face staring back at you isn't yours. Not entirely. Not honestly. It's the face that learned how to smile to avoid being questioned. The voice that learned how to sound certain just to be accepted. The posture that learned how to carry tension like it was armor. And somewhere along the way, the real you went silent. You didn't kill it. You didn't betray it. You just left it behind, little by little, every time you chose to be what they needed you to be instead of what you truly were. That's what the persona does. It teaches you how to survive by becoming unreal. In Jungian psychology, the persona is the mask we present to the world. It's not inherently evil. It's necessary. We need some kind of social face to function. But when the mask becomes the identity, when the act becomes the truth, the soul begins to suffocate. And you feel it, don't you? That quiet emptiness after conversations. That tired ache in your chest when you're alone. That lingering doubt that none of your relationships really see you because you're not really showing up. No one told you the price of fitting in would be the slow erosion of your inner life. No one warned you that becoming likable would make you forget how to be whole. And now, here you are, performing kindness, performing confidence, performing certainty, while deep inside something screams in a voice you no longer recognize. Something wild, something angry, something true. But you can't let it out, can you? Because it would ruin everything. Because the mask you wear is not just a disguise, it's a contract. A deal you made with the world. I'll be what you want if you don't abandon me. But here's the tragedy in becoming what others want you abandoned yourself first. The persona is built layer by layer, usually in childhood. You sensed what was rewarded, being quiet, being agreeable, being strong, and you mimicked it. You learned that certain parts of you were inconvenient, too sensitive, too curious, too intense. So you buried them, not with a shovel, but with a smile. This is how psychological exile begins, not with violence, but with silence. And over time, you mistake the silence for peace. You tell yourself you've matured, that you're just keeping the peace, that you've outgrown your fire. But what you've really outgrown is yourself. Most people think freedom means doing whatever you want. But psychological freedom means being whoever you are without flinching. It means not having to shrink around people who can't hold your truth. It means being able to sit with your darkness without disguising it as light. The persona doesn't allow that. It demands performance. And performance is exhausting when the soul wants to rest in its rawness. There's a reason why so many people feel numb, why success feels hollow, why love feels distant. Because their lives are built on personas, roles they've mastered, identities they've inherited, masks they've never dared to take off. Nietzsche warned us that every profound spirit needs a mask, but he didn't mean that you should become the mask. He meant that the world can't handle the rawness of your truth unless it's filtered. But if you forget that it's a filter, if you confuse the image with the essence, you start living a lie so convincing even your soul starts to believe it. And that's the real danger, not that others don't see you, but that you stop seeing yourself. The mask becomes a prison the moment you no longer know where it ends and you begin. That's why you hesitate to be vulnerable. That's why you rehearse your words before speaking. That's why you feel disconnected even in moments of supposed intimacy. Because your persona is speaking, but your soul is silent. And the longer you remain silent, the more the persona thrives. It feeds on your absence, on your denial, on your fear of being truly seen. But here's the question that haunts you. What would happen if the mask cracked? If the nice version of you broke down, if the confident voice began to shake, would they still love you? Would they still follow you? Would they still believe in you? And beneath that question is the real fear. If you showed up raw and unfiltered, would you still believe in yourself? The persona has become a survival strategy, so deeply embedded, it now feels like truth. But it's not. It's camouflage. You've learned how to blend in, but you've forgotten how to stand as you are. And there's a cost to that. Not just loneliness, not just confusion, but the death of inner authority. You no longer trust your own instincts. You second-guess your every word because you're not rooted in self, you're floating inside a character. And yet even now, something inside you remembers, not in words, in ache, in hunger, in those quiet moments where you wish someone would just look at you, not the version of you you've perfected, but the one that breaks, burns, trembles, rages, hopes, the one you've locked away behind performance and politeness, the one you're terrified to reveal, but dying to become again. There comes a moment in every human life when the act becomes unbearable. When you can no longer keep up the image, the tone, the carefully crafted expressions that keep people comfortable. A moment where something deep within you begins to rebel, not loudly, not violently, but in still piercing silence. You start feeling disconnected from conversations that once thrilled you. You notice yourself laughing, without meaning it. You feel eyes on you, yet you feel unseen. These aren't random shifts. They are signs that your soul is growing restless beneath the mask. It's trying to breathe again. It's trying to break through. But here's the tragedy. Most people don't listen. They numb it. With distractions, with obligations, with spiritualized bypassing and toxic positivity. They tell themselves it's just a phase or that it's selfish to feel this way. But what they're really doing is suffocating their own becoming. Carl Jung said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But that privilege requires sacrifice. And the first sacrifice is the mask. It's the willingness to be misunderstood, to lose favor, to risk solitude. Because the persona doesn't just protect you, it chains you to the expectations of everyone it was built to please. You become afraid of disappointing others more than betraying yourself. You say yes when you mean no. You stay silent when you want to scream. You apologize for things that aren't even yours to carry. And every time you do, your soul recedes a little deeper into the unconscious, waiting, watching, weeping. The persona doesn't only shape how others see you, it shapes how you see yourself. You start believing you're only valuable when you're useful, only lovable when you're agreeable, only safe when you're in control. So you overperform, you overgive, you overthink. And the deeper truth is, you don't feel worthy of being seen in your wholeness. Somewhere along the line, you learned that the real you wasn't enough. Maybe someone shamed your sensitivity, mocked your dreams, dismissed your pain. Maybe you had to grow up too fast. Maybe you were praised for being strong and you made strength your entire identity. But now that strength is a wall. And behind it, you're lonely, starving, depleted. The soul doesn't care about performance. It doesn't care about how many people approve of you. It cares about integration, about wholeness, about living in alignment with what is true, not what is popular. And truth is messy. It's contradictory. It doesn't always make you likable, but it makes you real. And realness is the only thing that can truly connect. But we're afraid of that, aren't we? We're afraid that if we dropped the mask, we'd be abandoned, that our darkness would disgust, that our brokenness would repel, that our truth would collapse the roles we've built our lives around. And maybe it would. But here's the secret: what collapses was never stable to begin with. Freedom begins the moment you stop living for optics and start living for alignment. The moment you stop chasing how things look and start listening to how they feel. The moment you stop trying to be impressive and start being honest. And that honesty is terrifying at first, because it strips you bare. It threatens everything false within you. But it's the beginning of real transformation. And you don't need to burn your life down to find it. You just need to turn inward, slowly, gently, ruthlessly. Ask yourself, where am I performing? What am I hiding? Whose love am I still trying to earn? What part of me have I disowned just to feel safe? These are not questions to be answered quickly. They're invitations, portals, rites of passage. And if you follow them far enough, you will find what Jung called the self, the totality of who you are, beyond the fragments and roles. The self doesn't want you to be good. It wants you to be whole. It doesn't want you to be liked. It wants you to be real. It doesn't want performance. It wants presence. But to reach it, you must betray the persona. And betrayal is exactly what it will feel like at first. Because the mask protected you. It gave you belonging when you felt lost. It gave you power when you felt weak. It gave you direction when you felt invisible. But now it's become a burden. It no longer serves you, it owns you. And you can feel that ownership every time you're in a room and have to hold back the most honest part of yourself. Every time you walk away from a conversation knowing you weren't real. Every time you smile through tears just to keep up the illusion that you're okay. This is the weight of the mask. This is the quiet war it wages on your soul. And at some point, you must choose comfort or truth, approval or wholeness, familiarity or freedom. Because you cannot have both. Not fully. Not at once. The soul does not negotiate with masks. It waits, and if you wait too long, it begins to ache in places even medicine can't reach. That ache you feel when you're successful but still empty. That ache when you're surrounded but still alone. That ache when you've done everything right and still don't feel real. That's your truth knocking. That's your soul whispering through the cracks of your persona, come home. I'm still here. Most people don't realize they're wearing a mask until it begins to crack. And it doesn't always break in dramatic ways. Sometimes it breaks in silence, in small betrayals of the self. You're in a room full of people and suddenly feel invisible. You're praised for your strength, but inside you feel hollow. You get what you thought you wanted and feel nothing. This is the soul's quiet revolt. The mask is still on, but the person underneath is gone. And that emptiness. It isn't laziness. It isn't depression. It's disconnection. The absence of essence. The cost of conformity. You weren't born with this mask. You built it. Not out of vanity, but out of fear. Fear of rejection. Fear of abandonment. Fear of the chaos that might unfold if you told the truth about how you really feel. And that fear, though invisible, runs your life. It chooses your words. It edits your emotions. It determines who you allow close. And worst of all, it convinces you that this is love. That if someone only accepts the curated version of you, that's enough. But it's not love. It's approval. And approval is not connection. Approval is conditional, transactional, shallow. Real connection only happens when you're real. And the mask prevents that. This is why your relationships feel distant even when they're full of attention. Why you doubt the sincerity of compliments. Why part of you always feels like an imposter. Because somewhere deep down, you know they don't really love you. They love the version of you that doesn't make waves. The version that's polite, manageable, palatable. And if they only love that version, then what happens to the parts of you that don't fit that mold? You exile them. You bury them in the unconscious. You learn to flinch at your own fire. And eventually you forget they ever existed. But the soul never forgets. It waits. It mourns. It whispers through anxiety, through fatigue, through the strange hollowness that no achievement can fill. Jung taught that the path to wholeness is not imperfection, but integration. And integration requires facing the parts of yourself that you've exiled for the sake of the persona. The rage, the grief, the craving for chaos, the parts that don't play well with the world's expectations. They are not your enemies, they are your medicine. But you won't heal by pretending they don't exist. You won't heal by spiritualizing your pain or masking your confusion with cliches. You heal by allowing contradiction, by giving voice to the wild parts within, by no longer apologizing for your humanity. But here's the challenge: the moment you begin to take the mask off, the world resists. Not because it hates you, but because it has grown comfortable with your disguise. People will say you've changed. They'll say you're selfish. They'll say you're not who you used to be. And they'll be right. Because you're not. You're shedding the performance. And people who are attached to your mask will not know how to love your face. That's the cost of truth. You may lose people. You may lose opportunities. You may lose your carefully constructed image. But what you gain is yourself. And that self, it's not perfect. It's not polished. But it's real. It cries without shame. It rages without guilt. It loves without pretending. And that realness is your freedom. Because once you've tasted it, you can't go back. You can't go back to being polite while your soul is screaming. You can't go back to suppressing your sadness just to keep others comfortable. You can't go back to saying yes when your body is screaming no. You can't go back to sleep. This is where Nietzsche's idea of the eternal recurrence becomes relevant, not as a metaphysical theory, but as a psychological warning. If you were to live this life again and again exactly as it is, Would you be willing to wear the same mask forever? Would you be proud of the life you built around avoidance? Would you be content with a life lived for others' comfort at the expense of your own truth? If not, then something must change. And it begins not with rebellion, but with remembrance. You must remember who you were before the mask, before the roles, before the agreements. There is a you beneath the persona, unpolished, unfiltered, untamed. That is your soul. That is the self Jung spoke of, not an ideal, but a totality. And the more you reconnect with it, the more the mask begins to dissolve. Not through force, through presence, through honesty, through stillness. Stillness is how the mask is broken. Not with drama, not with declarations, but with the quiet decision to stop pretending. To sit with your real feelings, to say what you mean even if your voice trembles, to listen to your intuition even when it doesn't make sense, to be misunderstood and stay soft. That is power. That is freedom. And no mask can give you that. There is a silence that arrives when the mask begins to fall. It's not the silence of emptiness, but of truth returning, of something ancient within you, remembering what it means to simply be. Not to impress, not to persuade, not to charm, just be. And it feels strange at first, exposed, naked, almost shameful. Because you've lived so long through a filtered self that the rawness of your own presence feels like a threat. But that discomfort is not a warning. It's an invitation to finally live from your essence instead of your image. And yet the ego will fight this process. It will panic. It will try to reattach the mask. Because the ego is addicted to control. It needs to know how you'll be perceived, how others will respond, what will be lost. But the soul doesn't care about outcomes. It cares about alignment. The soul would rather be alone in truth than surrounded in pretense. It would rather be quiet in its authenticity than loud in its approval. And that's where the war begins, between the part of you that wants to be free and the part of you that's afraid to lose the benefits of being false. You see, the mask doesn't just hide your pain, it hides your power. The power to say no, the power to walk away, the power to disappoint others and still love yourself, the power to be misunderstood and still remain grounded, the power to no longer explain who you are, just to be allowed to exist. That power terrifies the ego, because it means you no longer rely on external permission to be yourself. It means you've reclaimed your inner authority. And once you do, the world can no longer control you through shame. But here's the truth. Most never speak. Removing the mask doesn't mean you'll be accepted. It means you'll be real. And realness carries a cost. You might lose admiration. You might lose invitations. You might lose roles you performed for so long they became second skin. But what you gain is far more sacred. You gain access to your own soul. And with that comes something no applause can offer: peace. Not comfort, not safety, but peace, the kind that comes from knowing you are no longer lying to yourself. And this peace isn't loud. It doesn't shout or sparkle. It settles. It grounds. It lets you sit in your own presence without fleeing. It lets you meet your own gaze in the mirror without pretending. It lets you walk into a room without rehearsing who you need to become. That's what freedom looks like: not perfection, but presence. Not performance, but embodiment. Not applause, but truth. And this is where the journey circles back. Because the persona isn't something you kill, it's something you outgrow. You thank it for protecting you. You bless it for helping you survive. But you no longer let it speak in your place. You no longer let it dictate your worth. You no longer let it edit your soul. You walk forward not as a role, not as an image, but as a living, breathing contradiction. Beautiful, wild, incomplete, honest. Carl Jung once wrote, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls." But what he didn't say, what you must now remember, is that facing your soul is not an act of violence. It's an act of return, a return to the self, a return to what was never broken, only buried, a return to the original face before the world told you who to be. And now the question remains, what happens if you don't return? What happens if you keep the mask on? You may gain applause. You may climb higher. You may succeed in every visible way. But you will not be free. You will not be whole. You will wake each morning with a subtle ache that no success can soothe. You will wonder why love always feels distant, why silence feels heavy, why your victories feel empty. And that ache will remain not as punishment, but as a reminder that your soul is still waiting, that the door is still open, that the mask can still be removed. So if you felt tired lately, tired in a way sleep doesn't fix, maybe it's not your body that's exhausted, maybe it's the mask. Maybe it's time to stop performing, to stop proving, to stop pretending. Maybe it's time to walk away from the version of you that was never real and come home to the one that's always been waiting. Because beneath the mask, you are not broken. You are not too much. You are not unworthy. You are simply unrevealed. And now, it's time to reveal yourself. Let the mask fall. Let the soul rise. And for the first time in your life, breathe.